Where does palm oil come from? Theoretically, it comes from the scum on top of the ponds. In reality, because it has been a good booming market, we have seen, until recently, a very large number of so-called mini mills. The important point for all of us in the room here is that that is demand for palm oil specifically that is disappointing. This was the use of palm oil, nothing else but palm oil. So it's interesting, very often UCO gets far more attention than palm oil. UCO exports are actually trifling compared with palm exports. Where does palm oil come from? It's come from these mini mills. This is now accumulating as palm oil stocks, and that's part of the reason for that. The big question is, will Indonesia exports of palm oil resume? Perhaps with higher duties. One of the problems has been the duty on the palm oil is lower than the duty on palm oil. So there was an arbitrage opportunity there. The decision, of course, is the Indonesian government's decision. It has nothing to do with us. I would just remark on something that's quite interesting, that's quite ironic about this. I have worked for a long time on this, and one of the topics I remember working on repeatedly was the EU's ban on palm oil in biodiesel. And Malaysia and Indonesia were up in arms. We all were, frankly, because it was an entirely unfair constriction. Remember, there were two WTO challenges. So Indonesia and Malaysia fought very, very hard to ensure that the European Union continued to use palm oil in biodiesel. Well, I would put to you that the European Union is still using palm oil in biodiesel. They are just paying for it at a lower quality standard. And that, of course, is in everyone's interest. It is very ironic that today the people who are stopping palm oil from entering EU biodiesel is the Indonesian government. Now, someone in the room will say to me that this is fraud. There is no such thing, it is arbitrage. If someone says to you, please supply this quality of oil to you, supply it, no matter how you produce it, that is your business. And I would say to you that if the European Union are interested, the customer is always right. If they are interested in buying low quality oil at a better price, well then it is jolly good of producers in Southeast Asia to produce it. So Indonesia can still benefit from this arbitrage opportunity. Will they do it? We don't know. For now, it does look like the exports are being restricted entirely. Speaking of biodiesel, a topic of great interest, of course, is B40. It's probably the topic that we've had the most questions about in the last 6 months. And I would just like to say, the Indonesian biodiesel mandate has proven all the skeptics wrong. Indonesia has done exactly what they said they would do. My colleague, my colleague Kim Chen here is the real expert in this. She has been following this in gruesome detail since the very beginning. Like to everything she has told me has come true. Funding today is no longer a concern, thanks to this inspired decision not to reimburse non-PSO diesel for biodiesel. To understand how that works, we have to go into the murky world of the Indonesian diesel market, but suffice to say, the diesel blenders can afford to do it, don't you worry. And I would also say to you that I do not believe that the Indonesian government looks descent lightly, and anyone who does not blend, I am sure, will be in trouble. So we have no concern with that. B35 stocks have been run down ahead of schedule. They're now ready to bring in the B40. So they're coming in. Now, that doesn't mean we believe that they will go full gung-ho and hit their targets. This is very interesting. This is the annual Indonesian biodiesel consumption actual versus target. So the target of volumes. Since 2018, the first point you can see is the massive increase in demand. The second thing is Indonesia rarely ever hits its targets. That's not to blame them, no one really ever does. We expect in 2025 a full B40 will be at the 13.6 million range that Pantagio showed. We expect it to be slightly, not to be the percentage of the target, which used to be slightly below where it was previously. But that is still a pretty good increase, 12.1 million tonnes. Why do we expect that? Well, it takes time to transition, it takes time to get there. One other point I would make, is that of course a lot of this is coming towards the second half of the year. If you look at the monthly allocations, they ramp up towards the second half of the year, again, suggesting the first half of the year less than another year. One final point on this. The Indonesian biodiesel mandate today is significantly more credible than that in either the EU and the US, and I appreciate very much what we were hearing from Emily, which is the naked truth. Budget cuts mean will Europe and the US continue to support biodiesel? Everyone asks questions about Indonesia, but Indonesia haven't worked out. The real question is what happens in the US and the EU. So, you get the picture. We see stocks coming up towards the middle of the year, and what we see is a need to essentially bring down prices to sell in palm. But what about the rival oils? We have two options here. Either palm oil prices come down, or all other edible oil prices go up, and palm oil becomes more competitive that way. I think everyone agrees that palm oil needs to become more competitive. The just question is, how does it do it? Well, the crop that matters is the mighty soybean. As we said at the very beginning, that is the marginal ton of oil. So, yeah, this is just to show you, I think this is, you're aware of some of this, but this is soybean meal prices and corn prices on the left axis, and soybean oil prices. When we hit peak palm oil in 2019, the world changed. Previously, soybean meal and soybean oil prices, there wasn't much happening on this. When we started to run out of palm oil as the marginal ton, suddenly we saw rallies in soybean oil. We saw a bit of soybeans up and sitting back down now. But interestingly, we also saw soybean meal become cheaper than soybeans. And this is a critically important point. Today you can buy the product at less than the raw material. Why? Because the oil is subsidizing the meal. Just to remind you, soybeans produce approximately 80% of meal, 20% oil, you all know that. Prior to 2020, we traded in a narrow range. Because we need more oil, there's a lot of volatility in there, and the prices are divergent. And soybean meal today is cheaper than soybeans. So, what does that mean? We're subsidizing soybean meal prices. So, what happens with all this soybean meal? Emily already mentioned it. What are you going to do with soybean meal? We differ slightly, I'm afraid, in your view. We can argue about this. This is the soybean and soybean meal to corn ratio. The soybean to corn ratio is a very common ratio, used a lot. It's widely used. It's a good indicator of planting intentions. The soybean meal to corn price ratio is a little bit different. It's not that done that often. What it really shows you, it's first thing it shows you everything bouncing around, but what it really shows you is because soybean meal is now cheaper than soybeans, soybean meal to corn has become very, very cheap. And most recently, we've seen corn prices go up a little bit, we've seen milk prices come down, and we're coming right back down to the ratio that is very, very low. This is US data. If we were to look at this inside Indonesia, it would be even more extreme, because Indonesia has very, very high maize prices. And there are many other places where carbohydrates are very, very expensive. Now, why is this important? Well, we've spent quite a bit of time speaking to various feed millers to work out what is going to happen with the soybean meal. And it turns out the soybean meal to corn price ratio is actually a pretty good indicator of what is going on. So this is US soybean meal incorporation rates in feed. Since 1986, the US produces so much wonderful data all the way back to 1986. First point to make, the soybean meal share of feed has gone from about 11% to about 17%. In other words, there has been more soybean meal going into feed consistently. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that we have seen more and more poultry consumption. Poultry uses more feed. So, but the other point is these low prices here, whenever we have a low soybean meal to corn price ratio, we see a spike in the soybean meal share of feed. In other words, the market is learning how to utilize cheap soybean meal. How are they doing this? Well, increasingly, soybean meal today is valued as an energy source, not a protein source. What does that mean? It means you look at what is the most expensive source of energy and how much the soybean meal price compare with that. One way in which this has happened, as I mentioned, very high oil prices. If you look at soy and poultry feed today, previously poultry feed had a 5% share of vegetable oil in poultry feed. Today that is 1%. They have taken out almost all the expensive oil and replaced it with meal. They leave 1% for pelleting. Another way this happens is that soybean meal is replacing corn, it's replacing PPG. At the most extreme end, it is replacing supplementary amino acids, synthetic amino acids. And that means the soybean meal demand in our view is much stronger than anticipated, and it means that soybean oil prices need not appreciate as much as we may have thought. It also means one other thing that all the Malaysians viewers we have to know, it means your chicken is becoming tastier. A higher protein diet means a crispier fried chicken. So I'm really out of time, so I should conclude on this. Supply growth in palm oil sphere. Palm oil can be a proven oil. The marginal ton today comes from soybeans. Malaysia, we do not see production improving, we see it declining slightly. Indonesia, we see it improving, 2.2 million tons. But that number is not as important as when that production comes. We see it coming in the first half of the year, which will coincide with weaker demand for exports, a ban on the exports of waste oil, and will mean Indonesian stocks accumulate. In our view, they start to spill over to Malaysia. To reduce Malaysian stocks, palm oil needs to become more competitive. Soybean oil prices will go up in our view as the crush increases, but maybe not as high as people thought. Because feed compounders are learning how to use cheap soybean meal and incorporate compounds. And this is the number you all want to know. We believe that means palm oil prices will have to decline. We expect prices to weaken in the first half of the year to the level of about 4,000 to 4,200 units by July, after which they will be. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Julian Conway-Gill. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, just before we proceed, it is my pleasure to once again invite you to join us via Slido for the Q&A session, which will be taking place towards the end of this next conversation. And I would like to, before we take to the final paper, Mr. Muhammad Salim Khairul-Bakas, Director of Bursa Engineering Isberhad, to accompany Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar, Chairman of Bursa, to kindly join us on stage in presenting tokens of our sincere appreciation to our presenters. Mr. Thomas Milkey.